So, good afternoon you all. I am Dr. Sanjita Das, working as Professor, Head of Department of Pharmacology in Noida Institute of Engineering and Technology, Pharmacy Institute, Greater Noida. So, today I am going to discuss about clinical pharmacy, which is a part of pharmacy practice BP 703T, and it is very much useful part. As a pharmacist, we all should know about clinical pharmacy. So, let us first know what is the definition of clinical pharmacy, right. So, clinical pharmacy is defined as the branch of pharmaceutical science dealing with utilization of pharmacist knowledge, skills and judgments related to biomedical and pharmaceutical sciences to prove the safety, the cost and the precision of drug uses in the patient care. So, it is all the role of clinical pharmacist, and this definition comprises of how it utilizes the pharmacist knowledge, skills and judgments related to biomedical and pharmaceutical sciences. And this clinical pharmacy may also be defined as, in other words, like the science and practice of rationale use of medications, where the pharmacists are more oriented towards the patient care, rationalizing medication therapy, promoting health wellness of people. So, all these clinical pharmacy, it is totally related to the patient care and the benefit of the total patient well-being. And what is the status of this clinical pharmacy in India? Let us know. And I think we all know that in countries, developed countries mainly, like United States of America, Canada, etc., clinical pharmacy has already taken good shape. In India also it is progressing, but it is now in infancy stage and it is gradually progressing. And the role of retail pharmacist is viewed nowadays to take the there is pills, transferring the pills from large bottles to a small one and continuing tablets, and that is all these things are there. And in retail pharmacy still there is need of progress of this clinical pharmacy. So, let us know about what is clinical pharmacy in and what are the prospects of clinical pharmacy also. If we want to know about the history of clinical pharmacy, this clinical pharmacy was first used in 1953, right, and the concept of clinical pharmacology started in 1960 is with two incidences. So, what are those two incidences it started? One is, I think you all know, and if you don't know, you should know, the thalidomide tragedy, which was occurred in 1962. What happened in this thalidomide tragedy? There it was found that consumption of popular sedative, that is thalidomide, resulted in birth of babies with sealed limbs. Their limbs were totally that is sealed limbs, right. And the second one in 1968, the phenytoin toxicity, right. Phenytoin toxicity was reported in Australia, which was because of change in formulation, that is switching over from the calcium sulfate to lactose as an inert excipient. It is one inert excipient in the tablet. So, this switching it gave rise to the toxicity of phenytoin. So, it is the start of clinical pharmacy. If we will look into the history, it is the start of clinical pharmacy. Then let us know about the different requirements of clinical pharmacy. For the main target of clinical pharmacy, as from the initially I am saying you that clinical pharmacy, the target, the focus, that is main focus of this clinical pharmacy is the patient care. So what are the requirements of clinical pharmacy? That is knowledge of drug therapy, knowledge of the disease. He should know, she should know the knowledge of the disease, knowledge of the laboratory and diagnostic skills. Communication skill must be proper, because the clinical pharmacist has to communicate with the patients, right? With the patients who may or may not be technically educated. That clinical pharmacist has to communicate all these medications, prescriptions to the patients with their language, right? So communication skill is also important. Patient monitoring skills, it is also important. Physical requirements are there, that is the physical assessment skill, it is also important, right? Then next is drug information skill. What are the drugs coming into the market, and what are the drug-drug interactions, what are the drug toxicities, all these informations must be well known by the clinical pharmacist. And the therapeutic planning skills, he or she should know the therapeutic planning skills, how it has to be planned properly for the management of that particular disease of that particular patient, right? Then next is knowledge of non-drug therapy, it is also to be known by the patient. So all these things are very much essential requirements for clinical pharmacy. So let us know what are the responsibilities of clinical pharmacy requirements. First, we should know that the clinical pharmacy activities may influence the correct use of medicines at 3 different levels. So it is only to use, the clinical pharmacy is mainly targeted for the correct use of the medicine, right? And what are the different levels? Before the prescription, during the prescription, and after the prescription. Okay, before the prescription, during the prescription, and after the prescription. Let us discuss one by one. Before the prescription, what are its main responsibilities? Before the prescription means, prescription it is written by the doctor to the patient in a very simple way, I am saying you, right? So before writing that prescription, before getting that prescription, the first responsibility is clinical trial. I think it is very much that is very important responsibility of the clinical trial, clinical pharmacist, that is clinical trial, in which the drug has to prove its efficacy, its less toxicity, its potency on human being. That means it will be tried, the drugs, the new entities will be tried on the human beings, or healthy human beings, or the targeted patient, the targeted disease patients. Okay, so it is the first responsibility. Then formularies, right? Drug information, right? And drug related policies. The pharmacist should know all these things, right? All these 4 categories are the responsibilities of the clinical pharmacy, okay, before the prescription. So during the prescription, let us discuss what is the responsibility during the prescription. One is, the first and prime one is counseling activities. Whom to counsel? That is to the patient. That is, you are in okay condition, assuring the patient and counseling the patient that you have to take these medicines, otherwise it may this disease may deteriorate, or it is very much essential and these are the best medicines. Likewise, you have to counsel the patient. So counseling activity during the prescription. Clinical pharmacists can influence the attitudes and priorities of prescribers in their choice of correct treatments, right? It is also one responsibility of the clinical pharmacist to suggest or can influence the attitudes and priorities of the prescribers, right? Next is, during the prescription, the clinical pharmacist monitors, detects and prevents the medications related problems. It is very much essential, right? The clinical pharmacist is the person, he is the bridge between the doctor and the patient, right, and he or she will check or will monitor, detect and prevent the medication related problems, right. The clinical pharmacist plays the that is mainly it is paying the special attention to whom, to the dosage of drugs which need therapeutic monitoring. Therapeutic monitoring, it is one part of clinical pharmacy. So the clinical pharmacist pays special attention to the dosage of drugs which need the therapeutic monitoring. Some drugs are there which need to be monitored, that is periodically. What is the plasma concentration of that drug, as it depends on that the toxicity is there and the efficacy is there, right. The community pharmacist can also make prescription decisions directly when over the counter drugs are counseled, right. So what are those medication related problems? Let us discuss about what are the medication related problems which has to be handled by the clinical pharmacy, which is important parameter of important responsibility of the clinical pharmacy during the prescription. First thing is untreated indications, right, improper drug selection. If the drug selection is not proper, okay, then subtherapeutic doses, the treatment is not proper because of the subtherapeutic doses. If the clinical pharmacist will know this thing, then it is also one medication related problem. Then drug interaction, okay, one drug may give rise to may interact with the other drug, right. Then next is the medication use without indication, right, without indication. If the medication will be used, that will also coming under the medication related problems. Medication failure to receive the agent. Then medication overdose. If the medication overdose will be there, and again it will give rise to toxicity, right. Then adverse drug reactions. If there will be any adverse drug reaction, that is also coming under the medication related problem. So next is after the prescription. After the prescription, what are the responsibility of this clinical pharmacy? Let us discuss. Counseling will again come if during prescription or after the prescription, right. And another thing is that is preparation of the personalized formulation. It is one important parameter, that is preparation of personalized formulation. After the prescription, it will come as a responsibility of that clinical pharmacist. Then drug use evaluation, outcome research and pharmacoeconomic studies. It is one important thing, that is pharmacoeconomic studies, which is also one responsibility of clinical pharmacist. Then there are different practice areas of clinical pharmacy. So let us know what are the different practice areas of clinical pharmacy. There are broad area, it will start from ambulatory care, drug information, internal medicines and subspecialties, endocrinology, infection disease, nutrition support, transplant, pharmacoeconomics, obstetrics and gynecology, psychiatry, nuclear pharmacy, pharmacokinetic, clinical care. If there is any type of patient which needs the critical care, it is also coming under the clinical pharmacy practice area. So, critical area, geriatric and long term care, cardiology, gastroenterology, neurology, adverse drug reactions, investigational drugs, nephrology, pulmonary disease, rheumatology, pediatrics and surgery. So, all these are different practice areas of this clinical pharmacy, okay? Clinical pharmacy practice areas. So, which are to be known to all, because where they want to go they can select. And the functions of clinical pharmacy, let us know about the different functions of clinical pharmacy. there are 15 functions of clinical pharmacy. What are those? First is taking the medical history of the patient, it is the first function. The medical history, what he was taking during that is before coming to the hospital. So, and what are the other disorders the patient is taking with the present disorder for which he or she has come to the hospital, any other diseases, right. Patient education, it is also one important function, right. Patient care, it is the prime importance, right, important function. Then next is formulation and management of drug policies, different formulations and management of drug policies. Then drug information, right. Drug information is one essential function of clinical pharmacy. The next is teaching and training to medical and paramedical staff, research and development, right, because it is also one if clinical trial will say it is coming under research and development, right. Research and development and the participation in the drug utilization studies, patient counseling, right, the therapeutic drug monitoring, drug interaction surveillance, right, then the adverse drug reactions, staff use of drug, disease management cases, pharmacoeconomics. Okay. So, all these are different functions of different important functions of clinical pharmacy. So, next is about the scope of clinical pharmacy, that is preparation of patient medication history. So, it is important scope, any that is hypertensive patient or allergies to specific drugs observed in past, right. So, any particular drug or food habits, drug dependence or intoxication with any chemical due to occupational hazards, all of which are likely to interfere with the therapy. So, it has to be properly analyzed. So, this will help, this total patient medication history, it will help in saving the physician time, right, efforts, and thus will result in faster and more accurate selection of the drug therapy, right. And next is rationale prescription. The clinical pharmacist can suggest the physician and help him also, right, help him, because it has to utilize its knowledge of pharmacy. It can help him, the clinical pharmacist can help him in selecting the right drug. Some of the examples of irrationally combination, these two I have given these two examples like haloperidol, diazepam and amitriptyline. These are identified by the pharmacist, right. This has been given and these have been identified by the pharmacist. Then bioequivalence and generic equivalence of the pharmaceutical formulation, that is, it is also one important scope of clinical pharmacy. Then patient monitoring, observe the signs and symptoms that indicate the need for or reaction to drugs, right. The clinical pharmacist who knows the correct route of drug administration, the signs and symptoms of overdoses, contraindications, desired effects, undesired effects and side effects can help in monitoring the drug therapy for the safety and efficacy, a necessity with the increasing applications of the potent and toxic chemicals as well as the drugs, right. So, the drug with narrow therapeutic index or any type of that is administered in patients which are something critically ill or suffering from any chronic diseases, this can be, this is one scope of clinical pharmacy to analyze. The next is adverse drug reactions and the drug interactions. The clinical pharmacist can compile and process data using computers, right, and make it available to the medical staff. He is the person, she is the person has to make it available to the medical staff. Identify the drug effect modifications due to the interactions with several drugs, alcohol, smoking, environmental chemicals, those interactions he has to inform. And another scope is drug diagnostic test inference. What is the diagnostic, that is suppose for example, hematological parameters has been checked and all these to be informed are analyzed by, this is one scope of this clinical pharmacist, right. And another scope is intravenous admixtures. If there will be any admixture, that is intravenous admixture, that is also one scope of clinical pharmacy. Then drug information specialist, like a clinical pharmacist being an expert on drugs, may operate a drug information service. Then another scope is retail pharmacy stores. It is also well known to you all. A clinical pharmacist at retail drug stores can maintain that is patient drug profiles, family drug profiles and family records, based upon which the pharmacist can counsel the patient each time while filling the prescription. So, it has to maintain all these records as a retail pharmacist. Then the 10th scope is discharge counseling and patient compliance, right. Discharge counseling and patient compliance, the compliance to drug therapy can be improved several times. Compliance is very much essential to the drug therapy, by which only the patient can be treated. So, by educating and counseling the patient at the time of discharge from the hospital, because some patients are there who think that we have cured and we are discharging from the hospital means we are okay. No, they have to take the medicine properly at proper time. So, they have to be counselled or while dispensing the prescription at the retail counter also, the patients have to be counselled properly for compliance of the drug therapy. The next is the clinical research and continuing education program. The clinical pharmacist can participate in an evaluation program on investigational drugs. He can help the conducting of clinical trials. He can also develop the training programs, right. And another scope is the medical audit, right. The medical audit is a logical and necessary procedure within the organized teamwork. It is very much essential. The clinical pharmacist is either the initiator or a very active member of a functional committee. Okay. So, all these are different scopes, and this clinical research and continuing education program, it is very much essential for the clinical pharmacist. So, starting from the training, that means the clinical trials, the research activities, it is one part of clinical pharmacy. Starting from the, I think all of you know that this in this clinical trial, it is there that the healthy volunteers will come, the patients will come of the targeted disease, and then only the conduction of this clinical trial will be done. And this is based on sound principles of biostatistical methods of evaluation. So, this clinical pharmacy is a part of the team. She can help to conduct the clinical trial based on sound principles of biostatistical methods of evaluation. That means, he or she has to be or he is well known about the different aspects of clinical trials, starting from the patient care, starting from the that is written consent from the patients, and all these things he is well that is educated or well knowledge to he has to be known about all these aspects, and he can assist the whole team, right. And he can also develop the training programs for pharmacists, nurses and interns, because in I think we know that this pharmacists and nurses, they will come to the hospital for their proper training, right. And that training program can be that is formed and can be organized by those clinical pharmacy. It is one essential scope of this clinical pharmacy. Okay. And this medication audit, the 12th one, that is the medication audit, is a logical and necessary procedure which is very much essential within the organized teamwork. It must be within the organized teamwork, and the clinical pharmacist is either the initiator, okay, as I told you, he or she is the initiator or a active participant or active member of a functional committee. So, from all these aspects, all these discussions, I think you have idea about the clinical pharmacy, how he or she is important in a hospital pharmacy. All these things are required to know, and basic principles of all these pharmacy knowledge is essential for the clinical pharmacy, and there are different scopes of clinical pharmacy by which he or she can select different areas are there in the hospital in clinical pharmacy. So, as in the developed countries, in India also there it is going on, it is progressing, it is in a progress phase, right, and all the aspects are to be considered for the clinical pharmacy, starting from the there is patient counseling, taking the patient history and taking the medication history and what are the other diseases to the patient, and that is the proper communication level. And because I told you just now that clinical pharmacy is the bridge between the doctors, the physicians and the nurses. So, they must have proper knowledge, they have to apply their knowledge over all these aspects, whether there is any aspect to suggest the physician about the drug-drug interactions, the adverse drug reactions, everything they have to be properly prepared for that, and they have to again communicate to the patient with proper patience, and there should be proper that is communication about the or proper counseling about the medication, about the disease, all these things totally it should be totally confidentially. And if the patient is unable to understand the technical language, then the clinical pharmacist should also be able to communicate all these that is technical things or these things in his or her language. It is very much essential. And if the patient is that is uncooperative, then the clinical pharmacist should have to be ready for that is communicating all these things to his or her that is any guardian or any person who will again communicate him or her. So, all these aspects are very much well known to the clinical pharmacy, and he is the person, the clinical pharmacy is the person to give or to uplift the proper patient care for the that is hospital and for the betterment of the hospital, betterment of the patient. So, it is all about the clinical pharmacy. Thank you so much.